Hello, thank you for your company this Thursday evening. First tonight, it's been more than 7 years since the Grenfell Tower fire in London, which killed 72 people. Yet the repercussions are still being felt across the country. In the immediate aftermath of Grenfell, up to 30 high-rise buildings in our region were identified as having dangerous ACM cladding on them. That's the type of cladding that was central to the disaster at Grenfell. The latest government figures show that as of July, up to 5 high-rise buildings in our region still have ACM cladding. These buildings are found only in Sheffield, and the government says work is continuing to remove that cladding. Building regulations on high-rise flats were changed as a result of the tragedy, expanding the number of buildings that now are deemed to be unsafe for their residents. Since those changes, we know that at least 300 residential buildings across Yorkshire didn't meet the expected safety standard and are being monitored by the government. Of those 300 buildings, less than half have completed remediation work needed to make them safe. Michelle Lyons has been to visit 2 leaseholders in Leeds who've been fighting to make their flats safe.
The cladding crisis has taken its toll on thousands of people's lives, both financially and emotionally. Rachael Loftus moved into her flat in Leeds city centre in 2007, totally unaware of the hazard the building posed. It wasn't until building checks were carried out in the wake of the Grenfell fire that the shocking truth was revealed.
So alongside timber cladding on the outside of the building, we've also been told that this polycarbonate sheeting should never have been used on a residential building because it's likely to melt if the temperature got very high. And then the other problem is that this is the insulation that's used behind the outer wall of our building, and that's basically just polystyrene, so that also would melt and that should be quite toxic in the event of a fire.
At the time, the building was deemed so unsafe it had to have security staff on site night and day at a monthly cost of over £800 per resident. Now, new fire alarms have been fitted.
One of the hardest things to take actually is that sense of urgency that there was in January 2020, that things were so bad, it was so risky, that we needed to have immediate action. That has just completely dissipated now. We've barely heard from our freeholders in the last couple of years, only for them to send bills out to us. That's the only thing they do now. It's not clear yet why a building can be such high risk, and yet the people who are responsible for putting that right are dragging their heels and putting it off and causing more heartache, more worry, more stress and more bills for people like me every day.
Rachael is a member of the Leeds Cladding Scandal campaign group, and with the support of the Ministry of Housing, she and her neighbours took the owners of their building to court, as new legislation states the owners are responsible for its safety. But work isn't expected to begin until November next year. Just down the road, Emily has been fighting a similar battle with the owners of her building. She's experienced severe anxiety at times, living with the knowledge her flat isn't safe. Work is about to begin on her block of flats, and she's hoping this will put an end to her ordeal.
So, as you can see, obviously we've got the scaffolding outside, and it means that I can't even get onto my balcony at the moment. They've had to shut it off while they do the works, and it's going to be that way for still about a year, and I've already had it shut off for about a month, obviously during kind of the peak of summer, so it's been really, really hot.
Work on Emily's building is expected to last over a year, but she says it'll be worth it.
I'm lucky that my building is having its work starting now, whereas there are so many leaseholders across the building who are still trapped in their flats with no sign of when this is going to start. But I do hope that this is the beginning of the end of what has been a very traumatic 5 years.
Last year, the government made major developers sign contracts to address fire safety issues in their buildings over 5 stories high, and funding has been provided to replace unsafe cladding. But still, many developers haven't started work yet, leaving residents like Rachael with the stress of living in an unsafe building and paying inflated insurance bills. Michelle Lyons, BBC Look North, Leeds.
Well, Rachael's developers Grade Yard told us that they are currently progressing through their remediation programme to improve the safety of the residents across the UK. They say works on Rachael's building will be completed by November 2026, which they say is reasonable given the nature and complexity of the works in question. Well, today the inquiry report was published saying that successive governments missed opportunities to act. Earlier I spoke to Sheffield MP Clive Betts, who was the former chair of the government's Housing Committee and followed the Grenfell disaster closely. With the residents here still in Yorkshire waiting for cladding to be removed, I began by asking if politicians had been dragging their feet.
There has been action taken by the previous government in terms of providing some money towards removing dangerous cladding and getting developers to contribute towards the costs as well. Clearly, then there have been developers and owners of buildings who have tried to avoid the financial implications of the buildings that they wrongly and inadequately built. So there needs to be more pressure on them, and I think the Prime Minister today said government now will take a more active interest in looking at those blocks of flats in particular which have not had their cladding removed, have not had building safety work done, and I think it's up to government now to put pressure on owners, developers of these buildings to make sure the work is done in a much more rapid and effective way. It's absolutely disgraceful that people are living in buildings which are potentially unsafe. That's terrible for the mental health of those people, and of course many of them are stuck in buildings they want to move on from but can't sell.
Clive, campaigners have called on Labour to protect leaseholders from incurring any costs related to remedial works. Is that something you think the government can commit to?
I would hope so. I think leaseholders shouldn't have to bear the costs, but I'd also say neither should the tenants of rented properties like those at Grenfell. Government has to address the fact that previously tenants of rented properties didn't get the same sort of help. I think all householders need help from government to make sure they aren't discriminated against or have enormous costs put on them through no fault of their own.
What's your message to those people living in buildings where they suspect the cladding is defective and are concerned about their safety?
What I do is go to your Member of Parliament and MPs can get direct access to the experts in the Housing and Communities Department, and those experts can help identifying whether the buildings are at risk and can help with putting pressure on the owners and developers. That I think is a good first step to do to make sure you get the right advice, and that is something that government officials are there to do. Access that through your Member of Parliament.
OK, Clive Betts, many thanks for your time today.
Thank you.